Good afternoon. The half a day. The Committee on General Government Operation, Appropriation, and Housing now convenes this special economic service meeting. Meeting notes were given to the media on Thursday, February 25th, March 3rd, and for the record, today is March 5th, and the time now is 2:10. I will now call the meeting, the Special Economic Service meeting to order, and I ask my staff to please conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriations, and Housing, Chairman Senator Joe S. Agustin. Office of Finance and Budget, Director Stephen Guerrero. Office of Public Accountability, Public Auditor Benjamin Cruz. Bureau of Budget and Management, Director Lester Carlson. Department of Revenue and Taxation, Director Daphne Shimizu. Department Administration Director Edward Byrne. Guam Economic Development Authority Administrator Melanie Mendiola. Department of Labor Chief Economist Gary Hiles. Bureau of Statistics and Plans for Chief Planner is Deputy Director Matthew Santos. Guam Visitors Bureau Research and Statistics Manager Nico Fujikawa. Mr. Chairman, we reach a quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleagues that have joined us from the committee itself. We have Senator Amanda Shelton, my vice chair. We have Vice Speaker Tina Munoz Barnes, Senator Mary Torres. We have Senator Tony Ada. We also have Senator Chris Duenas, Senator Sabina Perez, Senator Joanne Brown, and Senator Tello Taidiwe. I also have present is my director from the Office of Finance and Budget, Steve Guerrero, and his staff. The conduct of this meeting shall be as follows. When speaking, please make sure the microphone is on and introduce yourself for the record. SES members may make inquiry during the discussion on agenda items. Any outside parties other than the SES member may make follow-up inquiries after all agenda items have been exhausted. We will now address the agenda item as stated. We will begin with the FY 2021 revenue tracking by BBMR and DOA and DRT. Mr. Lester. I'd like to also recognize we're joined by our speakers, Therese Terlai. Mr. Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The January Consolidated Revenue and Expenditure Report, I draw your attention, as always, to page 3, where we interject the actual collections against the adopted revenues for the period on the left side of the page. And then we do a projection on tracking for the remaining part of the fiscal year. And we have we're tracking at the time that this was released, 25 million below the adopted level, or a negative 3.25%. I would also like to take a moment to provide an update to the committee. My staff, along with Mr. Byrne, did a snapshot on February collections. As you might realize, there are postings that occur after the 28th of the month, so it's a fluid situation. But we are pleased to report that we received $21 million in withholding taxes for the month, and that's $4 million over what it was that we had projected to receive for the month of February. Additionally, we collected $25 million in BPT. So the revenue collection lag that we've been experiencing seems to be inching its way up. I will note that we have entered into a period of time where we're going to start seeing the economic benefits of increased capacities for businesses that are now allowed to open. We had businesses that could open but at reduced occupancy limits. Those have been raised. We have other businesses that couldn't open for almost a year that were just allowed to open, if I'm not mistaken, about 2 weeks ago or a week ago. What that has done in this snapshot is if you take keep your eyes on page 3, the tracking went down to $20 million below the projected level, and the percentage is down to 2.71% below. So that's a very significant improvement from the prior period. And again, the formal report will be issued as it normally is on the 20th. But if we are able to be the beneficiary of additional postings of revenue received, that will certainly improve this picture.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. I guess we'll just go ahead and skip item number 4 then, the agenda, for the preparation for a realignment, being that report that you have provided, anticipated report, that hopefully will improve by the 20th, even
Yes,
further.
And for the members of the public and the committee, a fiscal realignment plan must be a result of the end of a quarter. So we're not at the end of a quarter. And it has to be, the projection has to be below 3%. So we had to do this in 2018, and I've said this a number of times to the legislature. I don't want to ever do it again, and I'm very hopeful that this spending increase and the collection efforts, are materializing. And I hope we're going to start getting closer to the adopted revenue levels.
Thank you, sir. Moving along on the agenda, we have the FY 2022 assumptions supporting revenue projection. We'll begin with either BBMR or DRT. Reference to the individual corporate withholding business privilege tax, section 30.
Yes, sir. I think I provided this to the body. It was a comparative when we provided the budget. It basically takes fiscal 21 levels and compares it to the 22 that's in the executive budget request.
Do we have a copy, Joe?
No, but I thought I gave it out before. While Mr. Messner is making copies for everybody, essentially we took a look at where we were in fiscal 21, our collections, our state of our economy, and you'll note that there is a decrease in the general fund revenue categories in the executive budget request. And I think everybody, can feel relatively comfortable with that. We're looking at a slow recovery, but it appears that we are, poised for that recovery as long as we don't have any relapses of the pandemic. The vaccination is helping. Some of the activities that people can now avail themselves to, I think is going to help not just physical health, but mental health. So the comparative will show you category by category what we believe were achievable revenue levels. And Mr. Messner is passing it out now. We don't have the benefit of a 5-year revenue, stable revenue base to use as we've done in the past. We had the curveball in 2018 with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and then 2 years later, we had the pandemic. So our traditional methodology of taking 5-year averages and looking at other major economic contributors, like when the Sabaki Tower was being built and other capital improvement projects were underway, and we had a spike in business activity associated with these major projects. We still have a bunch of projects that are mothballed, and I think a little bit later on, Mr. Santos is going to go over some of the updates to the military construction. But we believe that these levels were consistent with the economy at the time that the executive budget request was submitted. We didn't have the second vaccine available. Now, potentially, we'll have the third vaccine available. There's just been, a very dynamic shift in where we were in late January when we provided the executive budget request to the body. And I will say this for the record. The governor's executive budget request is a proposal. It is basically a start of a conversation. And we believe that we've been able to frame the conversation appropriately. We don't believe that any of the numbers are unachievable. And we look forward to more discussion on revenue levels that the body feels appropriate as we get into the meat and potatoes in the summer. But there's a bunch of things that are happening that I think, everywhere I go, I'm not seeing people with their hands in their pocket. I'm seeing people actually spending money. And whether it's, in a sense that, is a little, that's not talked about very much. We do have a lot of things that are happening that people have to spend money to address. Whether or not it's going to Kmart, Home Depot, or unfortunately to the funeral home.
All right, thank you, sir. Moving along, agenda number 6, Ms. Daphne Shimzu, tax refunds and collection. If you can give us a status, where we're at with...
Half a day. Thank you, Chairman. So with regards to item 6A and 6B, you will notice there is a handout that was provided, and you'll see at the top of the handout, it's actually landscape, but at the top of the handout, it has item 6A at the top of that, indicated at the top right. But if you go ahead and turn it on its side, this handout is the refund liability report that is provided by law and is filed with the Speaker. This is for the month of January. And the information here, basically it shows by year how much how many returns have been filed, how much of those are liability assessed even or zero, and how many are refund returns. And it also shows how many refund returns were processed and paid. So if you'll look at the first section, kind of at the top, again, and scrolled or kind of moved to the end of the far right of the page, you'll see the column that says 2019. For 2019 tax year as of January, or the end of January, which this report was run right at the beginning of Feb, we had over 68,000 returns that have been filed. Of those, 15,000 were for liability assessed even or zero, meaning they were non-refund returns. Of those, 53,250 were for refunds. We had processed and paid 48,728. Of those that were processed, 4,499 were awaiting payment, and we estimate that we had only 23 2019 returns at that time that were not processed. We had paid out a total of $128.43 million already for 2019 tax returns. And we had, if you'll look at the next section below, $17.32 million is what's showing as of Feb 1, or January 31, that's outstanding for 2019 tax refunds. As an update to that, because it is already the month of March, a preliminary number is the preliminary figure that we have in terms of outstanding 2019 returns to be paid out, or refunds to be paid out, is just about $11 million. So although this number here is $17 million, our preliminary number with regards to 2019 refunds that are outstanding as of the end of February, which will be, again, for the report that's going to be filed in March with the Speaker, is going to be about $11 million is what we expect, and that is for income tax refunds. We are continuing to process and pay, and in fact, in the last week, we did pay out refunds for A status returns that were filed through December 31, 2020. And so, of course, we have been working with the Department of Administration and the fiscal team, again, I think since 2019 to work to have basically weekly refund check processing. And, of course, we are in a position now where we have, as of last week, paid out through December 31, 2020 returns. And that is the status on the outstanding tax refund payments. And if you'll turn to the next page, which is at the top of the page, has item 6B indicated at the top. With regards to Public Law 3590, Public Law 3590 was the enhanced limited exemption for certain small businesses. And this is basically the BBMR's comments on what was Bill 32335, which ended up becoming Public Law 3590. And of course, I know, but just to refresh perhaps those in the community that may be watching this public hearing, Public Law 35-90 was an enhanced lex fee. If you recall, in 2019, there was the limited exemption for certain small businesses. That first bill, which became law in 2019 and went into effect in January 2020, increased the exemptions, or what we call the Dave Santos, or we usually refer to as Dave Santos, from 40,000 or 50,000. The threshold went up to 100 and 250,000, meaning that for those businesses or organizations that reported or made up to 250,000, the first 100,000 was taxed at 3% as opposed to 5%. Public Law 35-90, what it did was it temporarily increased the thresholds from 100 and 250,000 to 250,000 and 500,000. And what that means is that for those businesses that made up to $500,000 in gross receipts, they would pay 3% on the first 250,000 for the first 250,000 of their gross receipts. However, that does have a sunset, and that sunset is 2 years from the date of enactment, and that sunset is in June 26, 2022, and that's Public Law 3590. Rev Tax, we are actually still working to process the BPT returns for this past year, so we don't have a complete information on this. However, we provided BBMR's comments on this because we basically wanted to advise or share with the body that we do agree that the impact that it will have is going to be up to $11 million, which was what was indicated in BBMR's comments here. And that is the update on tax refunds and collections, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to also recognize that we're joined by Senator Talina Nelson. Moving along, we have the Federal Assistance Fund. Yes, sir.
Mr. Messnan also received 2 handouts. for your review. The first one basically is a cumulative total of all the federal assistance that we've received to date. And on page 8, you'll see that that number is $1,718 million and change. And it breaks down the awards by recipient and the federal grantor. So we thought that you would like to see that. Additionally, there's another one, 2 pages, and it's the stimulus package that was passed in December, and the total of that is $304 million. A big chunk of that, $110 million, was awarded to the Department of Education. So we have recent awards. We've had awards that I think everybody's been aware of since at least the summertime, when we started putting all these things in one place for everybody to keep track of. And there's a lot of money that is in need of being spent. A lot of it's in planning stages. I think that's what DOE is doing with the $110 million. And if I recall correctly, they may have already allocated some of that money to Catholic schools. So there will be additional funds of a significant amount floating around in the economy. So we thought that in addition to the items on the agenda, we would bring this along with us for your information as well.
Thank you, sir. Moving along to I guess that would almost cover all the federal assistance funds, Mr. Lester, Mr. Carlson. We'll move to the impact of COVID-19 on FY 2021 tourism, local revenues, economy, and estimated recovery period. That we'll start with GVB and then we'll proceed to DOL.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So unfortunately, I do have a very brief presentation for everybody when it comes to an update on tourism. I do apologize if some of this looks familiar. I believe Dr. Jerry Perez and Governor Gutierrez were here earlier in the week to give an update, informational hearing a couple of days ago. So I'll be very brief, and then we can have a deeper discussion if need be. But if you turn to our presentation, on the first page there, in order to understand the impacts of COVID-19 on tourism for Guam, we also have to look at what's happened globally. So, there's no secret that tourism has been one of the hardest hit industries across the globe. And this chart is a really interesting illustration of just how significant the impacts are on our tourism industry. You'll notice the 3 points that were called out, those little dips in the growth over the past 30 years was back in 2003 when the SARS epidemic hit. Globally, we lost around 2 million visitors traveling. And then a little bit bigger situation with the global recession and the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, we lost about 37 million. But for COVID-19, it really is a cliff line that we've met, and it's halted any type of progress or growth over the past decade. And we're back to levels that are closer to 1990s. So I wanted to just kind of start to paint the picture that this is really what we're dealing with when it comes to a recovery for the Bureau and then for the island. Okay. If we turn to the next page, whenever we look at our arrivals or expectations, projections, we always use seat capacity as our cap, and we work our way down from there, understanding the flows of the industry. So this chart just illustrates the same kind of dip. As soon as the pandemic hit the island, we started to see some negative effects in February when it started to hit Korea, Japan, and then officially in March when it landed here on Guam. So since that time, you'll see that the airlines have essentially dropped off. We used to have around over 200,000 seats a month, and now we're averaging about 40,000 to 50,000 seats. Okay, next slide, sorry. All of these slides have the same trend, I do apologize, but for our monthly arrivals, around the same time, as soon as March hit, basically it's essentially been halted. And our average arrivals used to be about 120,000 people a month, and we are now down to about 1,500 to 2,000. And that trend continues up to this day. So you'll see 2021 up through January. We did have a little spike in January of about 4,000 visitors, and that's attributed to the Sea Dragon and the military exercises, the Cope North. But again, it's incidental at this point, right? Moving on to the FY 2021 projections. So GVB does have projections, but because of how fluid the situation is, Dr. Perez and I sat down and we kind of came up with different scenarios that we can push for, with 130,000 being on the higher end, a little more aggressive, and then around 82,000 for what we're currently tracking at. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up today was just to kind of show this body and understand the fluctuations in these projections are really tied into how risk proportionate we can develop protocols to allow travel to begin again. As it stands, everyone is mandatory quarantine, and of course this is something that visitors pay attention to when they decide to travel. So if we are trying to aim for 130,000 visitors, we do have to understand that people are now getting vaccinated, people can come with negative PCR tests, and what does that mean to the island, and what risks are we willing to accept? If we move on to the next slide, I just kind of wanted to show some progress that a comparison with other islands in terms of visitor arrivals and how much they've been able to capture from their 2019 levels. You'll see in this chart, everything with an asterisk, they basically require a negative PCR test with no quarantine. And you'll notice the percentage of 2019, that column there, how much they captured. All of these places have captured over 30% of those 2019 levels. So there is movement and there is momentum. You'll see Guam there on the bottom, we're barely at 20%. But again, this number two is slightly skewed because we did have January and February as full months attributing to that number. So this is a conversation that we're having with the reopening task force that's been put together with GVB. But I just wanted to paint the picture of the momentum we can start gaining towards if we do look at these more risk proportionate protocols for travel. And finally, I wanted to end with a similar slide that we began with. This is closer to home. This is the actual Guam arrivals since 1967 when tourism began for us. So over the past 50 years, you can see the dips in SARS, the financial crisis, but COVID-19 has really brought us back to levels around 1970s. So when we talk about a recovery, we do have to manage the expectations that a lot of the visitor support channels, travel agents, and wholesalers, they have all been hit in a negative way. And so when we try to push towards recovering, we also have to understand we're not working with the same type of capacity and means as we move forward. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I might add.
Yes.
Many of the members of the panel here are actively working on the refunding of the hotel occupancy tax bond. We are about 99% complete with the offering documents and the investor presentation. We anticipate being able to take investor calls mid to late part of next week, and we're on schedule to sell the bonds and close the bonds at the end of March. So we will report back to the body the impact that refunding will have on fiscal 22 debt service, and also the funds that would be freed up and channeled over to GVB for their recovery efforts.
All right, thank you. We have now the Bureau of Statistics and Plans. Federal and military contribution expenditures, do you have that? Or is it, because then DOL will give the Guam economic outlook. Gary, you're going to give the economic outlook, or are you going to be able to present the federal and military contribution expenditures?
Mr. Howells is going to provide it because there's been an update that applies to the economic outlook, which is the federal realignment report. So none of these things kind of live in a vacuum. So I'll fill in where he might leave things out.
All right. Can you make sure the mic is on and move it closer to you, Gary?
Does that work better?
There you go.
Okay, in terms of trying to forecast what the federal expenditures will be in the future, especially for military contracting, the first thing we look at is appropriations, are what funding is going to be available. And the appropriations in the last several years have gone up. 2019, they were $448 million. 2020, $470 million. 2021, $571 million. And the president's fiscal year 2022 budget hasn't come out yet, but that will give us some clues of what it will be going forward. So the overlying issue is that there's increased money
Mr. Chair.
available.
Mr. Chair.
There's increased money available through
page are we
federal
at?
appropriations. The next thing is that the more acid test of whether we're going to have an increased expenditures are based on, at the federal level, are based on the contracts, because once they have the contract, they're almost ready to commit to construction. So generally, the military contracts have been going up from 2017, 18, and 19. In 2020, there was a dip. However, due to the backlog of millions of dollars in construction, there's
Gary, can we get a copy of what you have so we can follow along on what you're presenting?
Sure.
Because we have copies from everybody else, just not you. Got right there, right behind you, the staff.
I'm looking from the economic outlook report.
Joe, is there sufficient numbers there?
Yeah, and I'd like to add that.
Move the mic closer to you. Bring it up to you. Don't worry. It's like in karaoke. Bring it right up to you.
So the statutory deadline for the executive budget request actually is before the time that the realignment report is due or is provided. So much of the economic outlook includes excerpts from the interagency group of the Inspector General's realignment report. And this report includes things like the existing contracts that are from the military. So what he's referring to is actually $1.1 billion is the estimated cost to complete current contracts. And this is in addition to the $550 some million that was newly authorized for 2021.
My original forecast was in the 2022 executive budget, a section in the budget. Since that time, the Office of Inspector General have come up with an update, and the key line of importance is DoD obligated $539 million and expended $365 million. So there's several things there. One, that the obligations, it's not only appropriated, but it's obligated for particular contracts. That's gone up. And the expenditures so far are below by close to $200 million on this year alone, and that's been accumulative over a number of years. So there's a huge backlog of construction. So that combined with the increased availability of H-2 workers and the increased number of H-2 workers on Guam and expected future increases, that we expect a measurable increase in construction in 2022 as we've seen in 2020 and 21 so far. So that's the military component. The general outlook is based primarily on two things. One, the resumption of tourism, and two, the receipt of federal funds. On the pandemic unemployment assistance, which is the Labor Department's largest section on federal funds, we, in the last year, ending December 31st, the Labor Department issued approximately $500 million in pandemic unemployment assistance. The total number of persons covered that received unemployment assistance during the calendar year 2020 ending December 31st was 29,096. Of that, 15,426, or just over 50%, was female. But that almost 30,000 that were unemployed were not all unemployed at one time. They were unemployed at various times during the year. So to give you an idea, that spread out the number that were unemployed in different periods. To give you a better idea what the unemployment is, in June there was 21,095 that were paid unemployment. In September, 20,237. In December, it dropped somewhat to 14,928. Also, of those receiving unemployment, approximately half of them had wage income, so they would not be counted in the official unemployment statistics, which were 17.9% as of the September period. But what's significant here too is since about half of them were receiving payment, with the new interpretation of the new unemployment law for this year, the people that were partially employed were not eligible for unemployment assistance. So about half of the people that were getting unemployment assistance have not been getting it so far. The new legislation and the new interpretation of it has indicated two things that are positive for the economy. One, the prior cap on the number of weeks worked was 39, so some people were at their expiration of number of weeks in December, and that's been extended to 50 weeks. And also in this year, the part-time workers were not eligible and were instructed not to apply. As those people apply, they will be able to get the compensation retroactively. So that's being worked on. There should be some payments coming out pretty soon on that, and it will take a little bit of time as people get re-registered. There's some glitches that people are having, and that should get us back to a payment level which we were experiencing last year. So that's the good news on that. And for the outlook, what Congress is debating, or the House has passed it, but what gets passed in the Senate will give us some big insights into what we'll have for the rest of the year in terms of unemployment compensation.
Anything else, Gary, you got?
Yeah, I have a couple of other things. In terms of the overall economic outlook, we'll be getting, as the year goes by, we'll be getting more information as the Congress passes things. Also, the president's budget should come out later in the year. That will give us some more information. Also, as the claimants for the war claims are being primarily exhausted, that there's a potential that the Section 30 money that was being allocated for the war claims could increasingly be released to the government of Guam. I'm not sure exactly on what the timing of that would be and the amount, but that's something that's a positive for the government of Guam.
Is that it, Gary? That's it?
Yes, I think so.
All right, thank you. Speaker Cruz, Auditor Cruz from the Office of Public Accountability, do you have anything you wanted to present today, comment? Before I ask Gita to give any presentation if they have. Sir?
actually, the only thing that I wanted to mention two things. One, the Office of Public Accountability has issued a couple of performance audits on the tobacco tax and on the use tax. The tobacco tax was 5 years ago, and 5 years ago this legislature passed legislation to try to collect that. To date, nothing's been done yet on the changes to the tobacco tax so that you can capture everything, because our audits have shown that there may have been a loss, some leakage. And when Congressman Nicholas was in the legislature, he championed the tax stamp. The tax stamp hasn't been implemented. The Office of Public Accountability has recommended to just tax straight up arrival at the port, forget the tax stamp. Nothing, neither one has moved, and you're losing tens of millions of dollars there. Last year, we issued our report on the use tax, and that was even before the pandemic. And before the pandemic, we discovered that there was over $1 billion of goods that was flying into the airport every year. And we barely collected $100,000 in use tax. We estimate that there could be almost $50 million in lost use tax because you haven't implemented it. And to date, since the issuance of our audit, nothing has been done on that either, at least nothing that has been reported to me. I understand that they're trying to get some system together, but you're losing a lot of money. The loss that you experienced in BPT was because everybody was getting it from Amazon and Walmart, and it was coming into the airport and not being taxed, and it was being lost. And not having the shopping malls open had everybody buying from online, and as a consequence, the brick and mortar businesses here weren't their tax contributions has gone down. So I'm just reminding you that we went through the effort of writing the audits. Please try to figure out some way to implement them. On a more positive note, Mr. Burns and I promised Madam Speaker last year during the hearing that we would try to get the financial audits out by the end of this month. We're getting pretty close to it. We have a whole number. It's actually taken, Mr. Burns and I meet at least once a week, if not twice a week, because I've almost gotten to micromanaging the financial audits by going with them every week. What still has to be done, what hasn't been turned in. And I think everything, all the major components should be done before the end of the month. And I think maybe a couple of weeks after that, we should be able to get GovGuam wide out. We're trying to do it sooner. But I want to thank Mr. Byrne. He convened a Zoom meeting of all the financial officers and impressed upon them the importance of getting a financial audit out in a timely fashion because of its impact on the bond rating and showing that we are a capable and trustworthy government. So I just wanted to report to you, ma'am, that, Madam Speaker, that with the assistance of Mr. Byrne, we have been getting closer, and with the assistance of the other directors, of them tolerating my tirades every week, we're going to get the audits out. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you.
So we are working on use tax, but from a more macro level. So we are working on use tax, and we have been actively trying to assess what we need to do. when it comes to the post office, we're very limited in what we can do. So, for example, in Saipan, for example, the director of their customs went to their postmaster and told them, I'm going to set up outside. If you don't like it, sue me. We don't have that you can't do things like that. So we can't stop the mail either. So most of those people are supposed to submit their use tax forms in good faith. And customs has very limited control about what goes out of the post office and stopping those people. So some of the legislation you guys recently passed, like the advance manifest, that's a big component for us to start getting advanced information regarding imports. We need more detailed data to be able to kind of track how much is coming in and what to watch for and be able to accurately assess taxes. So there are some recommendations that we could more immediately implement, like I guess just clearing the backlog of use tax assessments and making sure that all that stuff's updated, and that those efforts have actually translated in improved collections. So the audit period that was covered was 2017 to 2018, where there was about $6.4 million collected. Following the audit, the following 2 years, we collected about 9.7. When you look at that against say, air cargo, for the audit period, there was about 15,000 metric tons of imported cargo material versus 13,000 for the following year. So despite the decreases in, say, air cargo, we still saw an increase in collections due to better collections efforts and making sure that everything's logged and assessed. And that applies also for containers. During the audit period, there was about 28,000, and the following 2 years, there was about 25. So we increased our use tax collections by 53%, despite an 8% decrease in containers and a 12% decrease in imported air cargo. So, but there is a lot of gaps that we're trying to address, and we're doing that through a Interior grant. The Department of Interior is also actively working with us to find other avenues to actually pay for the system. So we released our RFP about a few weeks ago for a consultant to help us, help optimize the operations and adopt a single window operation, which is basically the best practice that's adopted by most customs organizations around the world, including our U.S. Customs. That's going to allow us to be able to cover a lot of those gaps and also collect economic data that we're missing. That closes on the next month, so we should start working on a project to address that starting next month once we've awarded the contract.
And to add to that, and thank you to the public auditor also for bringing up the issue of use tax and also tobacco tax. One on the issue of tobacco tax or the tobacco stamp tax, my deputy director, the prior deputy director and the current deputy director were the ones that are actually working on that, and so I don't have, I can ask them to provide an update to the public auditor and perhaps the body that's on the tobacco stamp tax. But on the issue of the use tax, there are things that we have done internally with regards to, of course, the group that processes use tax is the business privilege tax group, which really is very understaffed. What we did in this last year was I took one position in one group, kind of a higher paid group, and I converted that to 2 positions in the business privilege tax group. So we now have at least 2 more head count there where we didn't have before. So that's one thing. We do have somebody who is working on use tax, and to kind of expand on the single window, when we were able to visit the CNMI and to see how their system works, they don't even have a form, a paper form. Basically how it works is, you go to a window where there is a window at the Customs and Quarantine Agency, and you go there, they're able to, in their computer system, pull up the individual or the organization. They can see the history of the individual or organization's shipping. They see their shipping history. They can, have the system calculate it. And then that's the mechanism for working to collect for them to collect. With regards to what happens here on Guam, there is a UST form. The UST form is similar to the BPT form because it's both due on the 20th of the following month. So even with regards to the issue that Customs happens to have, you know, I don't believe, and I am not a lawyer, but by law, I don't believe that they can force people to, at the point of receipt of their shipment, to pay the use tax at that point, because the 20th of the following month is the due date for use tax. And so, you know, that gap from the point that a shipment is received until, you know, the use tax form is filed with us, and then we go ahead and enter that into the system, there is that gap. So definitely a computerized system, I think, would be very helpful. And so we're looking forward to kind of that being, that happening. But in the meantime, we do have somebody that is dedicated to entering the use tax forms into the system so that we can work to generate those forms. I know that it is happening because even in the last year, we were receiving a lot of complaints of people receiving notices that they owe use tax. And so we've been, you know, working to try to collect on those the best that we can. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Mr. Auditor, Speaker Cruz, I've advised the staff to look into those two OPA report, figure out a way how to work this and with the agencies that are overseeing that. Ms. Gita, Ms. Tina, you have anything you want to present on the Gita side before I open it up to my committee members?
Just real quickly, we were just doing a report on our small business loan program. For this period, we did try and develop a program that would help businesses survive, and our first program came out with a very low interest rate with a 90-day deferral of principal and interest payments. We did receive a lot of inquiries, of 150 different inquiries totaling 8.4 million. 17 actual applications came in. 10 were approved, totaling 594,649. 5 were declined, and we're underwriting additional 2. And I think what we're learning is that the extension of the COVID pandemic is causing extreme stress, so a lot of the businesses turn out not wanting to borrow. And secondly, we are recreating the loan program so that we're looking at maybe possibly up to 1 year interest-only payments for our small businesses. So again, we're trying to provide that assistance, put the money out there to help. So that's it, sir.
All right, thank you. You don't have anything else as far as bonds or anything that's ongoing, that's coming up soon, that we can get some relief?
Nothing that Lester hasn't already mentioned.
All right, thank you. Dr. Jones from University of Guam, do you have anything you wanted to speak about? Economist, we got a mic coming to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this invitation to be a guest at today's session. I don't have anything formal to add. For me, this is a master class for an academic, and I've got my reading cut out for me, so more to come after I've had a chance to look at everything. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'd ask my Vice Chair, do you have any questions to pose? And I will proceed to all the members of the committee before I proceed to the other of my colleagues.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the members here today. Ms. Shimizu, if you could go over the status of the economic impact payments. I think that's something we skipped over quickly. If you can tell us where we are with those payments, if everything from the first round has been sent out, and where we are in the second round of payments.
Suzus Masi, Senator Shelton. I did, in addition to the other items, items 6A and 6B, attached to that particular set of handouts are 2 media releases. With regards to the first EIP program, which we are now referring to as EIP-1, EIP-1, the law allowed for us to pay EIP-1 payments through December 31, 2020. So if you'll refer to item 7A, page 1 of 2, That is our final meter release of of 2020. And the reason I included this is, again, because this was our final check processing period for that EIP. So as of December 31, we had paid a little bit over $151 million, and that was 86,000 EIP checks that were processed and of course, that were received by our people. And so we are no longer paying out EIP 1. EIP 2 was the result of the CRTRA, and if you go to the next page, that's item 7A, 2 of 2. That was our most recent media release regarding EIP 2. For EIP 2, we were approved for $108 million, and then we did receive $94.2 million. As of last week, Friday, we had paid out over almost 72,000 checks that totaled about $76 million. We have until March 19 to make the last payment for EIP 2. Just to remind or to refresh everybody's memory, EIP 1 was based on 2018 or 2019 returns, and it's validly filed returns. EIP 2 is based on 2019 returns. And what we did, because there was no substitute year for EIP 2, it had to be on a 2019 return. What our team has been doing is, even for those 2019 returns that have been coming in 2021, we've actually been working to process those because, really it has been, and I think it shows in our efforts that it's been really our desire to try to get as many of these payments out as an advance to our people as possible. So I know a few weeks ago, and I think I mentioned this before, even as we've been paying EIP, those people who filed and had A status returns and were eligible, who filed at the end of January, they actually have received their EIP 2 payments as long as they were eligible and they were A status. We're going to continue again to pay those through March 19, and then from there, of course, as you know, there is another stimulus package that has already passed the House and is now already being discussed in the Senate. And I know President Biden has been, based on the national news, been working with the Senate to make sure that that gets through. And if that does pass, then we'll have EIP 3. I have already been in communication with my IRS counterpart since we were actually had a call the other morning, already working to try to schedule calls so that we can begin to discuss EIP 3 and how we're going to roll that out. But we still, again, have until March 19 to pay EIP 2, and then our plan is, of course, to pivot to begin to pay the rebate recovery credits. And sorry, to clarify, if you didn't receive EIP 1 or 2, it's still possible to receive the payment as a credit on your 2020 tax return. And so, we are going to be pivoting, working to process 2020 returns so that for those people who, for example, may not have gotten an EIP at all, or maybe those people who didn't get the full EIP because their income levels in their 2018 or 2019 returns were too high, but now for 2020, they're at income levels that will allow for them to receive the full, then they'll be able to receive that off of their 2020 returns. So that's the status of EIP. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Shimizu. I'm sure you can imagine how eager many constituents are to know the status of their EIP, and we direct them to your website to see the status. If you can share that website with the public now, if they're wondering.
Absolutely. So we do have a portal where you can go ahead and find your EIP status, and that will tell you of course, you have to go through certain security measures and make sure you have entered certain information. But when you've entered it correctly, you should be able to see both your EIP 1 and EIP 2 check amounts. It's a check number, check date, the check amount, and then the address that the check was mailed to. And so that's important because for those people who are filing their 2020 returns, you'll need to make sure that you have that information. But you can go to myguamtax.com and you can go ahead and go ahead and log in or register, log in, and you should be able to see that information. And we've had several people, or probably thousands of people now, check their status that way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a very convenient way to do it. And just one question. Nico, for you. I'm looking at the Guam historical arrivals. I'm not sure what page this is. The last page, where it gives us the destinations and the percentage of their tourism in 2019. And I'm seeing that you pointed out the difference between destinations with no quarantine required with a negative PCR test, and there are some here with who I'm guessing like Guam are requiring quarantine. However, Guam, in comparison to some of these places like Canary Islands that you did not detail if it has quarantine or not quarantined with a negative PCR test. What is it that they're doing differently to still be this far ahead of Guam, 10 percentage points ahead of Guam in their tourism? What's different there?
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, just to clarify, the biggest difference is they've created more travel-friendly protocols based on certain situations or circumstances that have been met. So negative PCR tests, no quarantine, with a couple of other things, but just across the board. I guess the point we were trying to make was that as it stands right now, everybody that arrives to the island is sent straight to quarantine, regardless of a negative PCR or even if a vaccine has been given. So now that things have been changing and the situation remains so fluid, I think in order to stay ahead of the game, we do have to be a little more proactive in terms of our protocols. Obviously, the safety of the community is the number one concern, but I think in order to see some real recovery or some traction, we also need to have risk proportionate protocols, right? For those who have been vaccinated, those who can prove a negative PCR test, maybe we can allow them a little more freedom throughout the island and so forth. So,
okay, I understand.
Yeah, that was kind of the point across the board, but a lot of them have eased restrictions and have been a little more travel friendly when it comes to protocols. So.
Okay, and the hope is that the new tourism recovery task force that we have now will work together with public health to address those restrictions and hopefully open things up by May.
Correct.
So,
and it is
comparison.
a two-part to this, right? Because a lot of the visitors in our source markets, Japan and Korea, they still have to face a 14-day quarantine upon return. And so that is a big detractor period for travel. But, as things move forward, they are working towards getting their communities, their population vaccinated. We may see this momentum, and this is what we're trying to capture now. Because I know the governor announced the May 1st reopening of tourism, but however, the channels that I mentioned earlier in tourism, it also takes time, right? The lag time between opening up on May 1st to actually having bookings and demand built up in that time. So this is where the prolonged recovery, when everyone keeps talking about 3 or 4 years, this is how long it's going to take to kind of move that forward. So.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep,
thank you,
thank
Mr.
you.
Chair.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, do you have any questions to the administrative panel?
Just a couple, yes, thank you. To former Speaker BJ, the public auditor, I did look very carefully at that audit regarding the collection of tobacco taxes and collecting them at point of entry or the ports. But I was not able to find another jurisdiction that did that at the point of entry. They almost all use bonded warehouses that I could find, but I'm not sure. I just wanted to know if you seen any other people do that successfully, and just what impediments they might have.
I have to say, I don't know. But I do know that on Guam, initially that was the way that we did it. It was at the port.
Yeah.
If you go to the statute, it's that 2-word amendment that was stuck in the middle of it that has, or the bonded warehouse.
Yeah.
But so initially that's how it was being done. And someone at some legislature decided to change it. And
Yeah.
so we're just suggesting
Okay, well, I'm still looking at that. Yeah.
either go back or.
We'll continue to look at that. If maybe Director Shimizu, when you're collecting the use taxes, have you seen in any other jurisdiction someone other than customs doing that collections? Or is it always customs?
So with regards to the collection of use tax, I believe the law states that it's customs that collects the use tax.
On
However,
Guam, yes.
yeah. And in CNMI, of course, customs collects, but customs collects because customs, rev and tax, finance, customs, rev and tax, their administration department, they all fall under the umbrella of finance.
Okay.
And so customs has access to collections data.
Okay, so for that collection at the window, we would need a change in local law, you're saying? Would it suffice to change this UST form due on the 20th of the following month, or is that a federal?
So the UST, the Form UST or use tax law, that's our local law.
Okay.
In the CNMI, it's actually, they don't call it use tax, they call it excise. However, Madam Speaker, I mean, I think it could be done in a few different ways. It could be done where perhaps maybe there could be, and you know what, we already are kind of shorted our own agency, but it's possible for there could be additional headcount that could be assigned to be the ones to collect at the customs. That could be one option. It could be where there maybe is a little bit of a change in perhaps how we're structured in terms of our organization, and it could be that maybe customs could be collectors of that tax, but because it is a local tax. But perhaps that could be looked into a little bit more, ma'am.
The post office is still going to be an issue because, you know, from a clearance perspective, you know, you have the two ports where you can hold cargo, but a post office, you don't have that mechanism to make sure that somebody, like, you know, gets assessed. And so part of the project that our agency is working on with customs is to start collecting all that information, whether they're exempted from it or not. So, you know, providing the commodity, the volume, and then also the cost, so we can collect sufficient economic data, because we're lacking there right now because we're currently just sampling imports documentation to do our economic reports on trade data or for trade data. So there's some policy changes that we might have proposed to be able to capture some of these things up front and digitally, but the timing issues are still going to remain. So, you know, she was talking about, you know, we can't do it at the point of shipment because they don't get assessed until they receive it. And there's no way for us to get it, you know, refund that. You know, that just creates more, makes it more complex. So some of the timing of it, and also maybe some tax nexus updates to the law to make sure that we capture things and that, you know, it applies to everything that comes in, will help do it. But the timing is probably going to need to be addressed just due to the fact that, you know, if we're going to get all this advanced data and we can match it up, say, with a business or a person, then we can make sure that we're covering those gaps and we don't have that leakage. But we won't have that mechanism unless we make it you don't have mandates within the law for people to submit that information up front or to have that, you know, provided to us, say, through a freight forwarder or shipper or vendor.
Have you ever seen that type of information mandated for
Yes.
things going through the post office, though? Because I think on the other...
Yeah, so the way that, you know, they fix that usually is through tax nexus laws, but they don't...
Tax what? Sorry.
Tax nexus laws to make sure that they can capture it, and that's a pass-through tax. And, you know, they would just have to, I guess, identify that as not for resale. So if you're buying through Amazon, you're going to assume that that's for personal use.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Then just Gita, real quick, what is the source of the funding for the loan that you described?
That would be our federal funds that Gita was funded with back in the early 70s.
Okay.
So that's in-house
All right.
funds for business.
And then the 8-page spreadsheet that BBMR discussed talks about the federal funds received. Part of this, item number 2, is the $117 million. And then I guess we had a recent audit come out with showing a small balance, and so I guess I just wanted to get an update on that balance. Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The reports are posted to the Governor's website, and you're right, there was a small balance of about 10 million at the end of December. We are just about to finish the January report, and it shows that all funds, as Mr. Carlson has often repeated, is that all funds were expended.
Okay, thank you. That's all I've got right now, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you. Madam Vice Speaker, do you have any questions, ma'am?
Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here. I just want to note maybe a catch up on this as oversight chair on the Guam buildup. You know, I have been looking at the various DOD contracts awarded for work here on Guam, and I'd like to see if you can share with us how GovGuam is collecting taxes on these awards. And, you know, it's looking over the list that I have, and it's quite a lot. So Gary, I know you were talking about that, but maybe Reverend Tax, if you can help me out here, because I see that there may be some resources that are escaping us, and hopefully we can continue to work together and see how we can tighten the process here.
Absolutely, and thank you, Vice Speaker, for that question. So with regards to collections, our team actually is working to undertake multiple initiatives, and one of those initiatives is a federal contract program. And this particular program is not something that we've never done before, it's something that we've done before. Our team is actually gearing up to do that. We do utilize usaspend.gov like a lot of other organizations do to determine, I guess, which companies have been awarded, and there's lots of ways to run reports from there. You can drill down on prime, sub, you can drill down on the year of award. I think part of the challenge with utilizing usaspend.gov is that it's based on award and it's not necessarily based on payment. So, you know, although there might be like a $20 million award this year, it's difficult to say when those actual payments are actually received or made. But our team is actually, again, gearing up to work on this initiative. Our team actually is working on multiple initiatives, which we don't always necessarily announce, but one of them is, of course, utilizing usaspend.gov and other resources so that we can make sure that we do connect with those, because not all of these companies may even register on Guam. And so, you know, again, it's easier to capture, of course, those companies that are the local companies, right? The ones that are regularly reporting. But it's the companies that may not even register on Guam. Those are the ones that we're working to try to capture. Because if they do have employees on Guam, they should be paying their withholding to Guam. If they do have gross receipts, they also should be paying gross receipts to Guam. So, you know, again, that's an effort that we have ongoing, which we're actually working to launch very soon.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, and just based on that answer that you submitted, Director Shimizu, I just want to say that with over the 70 companies or awards that have been awarded out for the jobs being done here, I think that there may be an interpretation issue on how the taxes would be assessed here. And I think that if we continue to work together and work closely with the military, because based on the breakdown and what we have today, I truly believe that there are much more resources that could be here based on statute that we already have existing in law here. So I'm hoping that I can continue to work with your team to see how we can better address this situation, because it is in the billions that has already been awarded just for the last 2 years. And I know that we can literally collect back based on what's already in the guidelines and protocols to be able to come back to Guam. So I hope I can get your commitment on that. Thank you. I guess the other question was just based on the questions that were previously asked, maybe what the status update on the RFP is on the process for the tobacco stamps.
What I can say is that our deputy director, again, both Deputy Director Santos and then now Deputy Director Leon Guerrero has been meeting with the Office of the Attorney General. That's what I do know. And so I know that they've been working on those various efforts with regards to the tobacco stamp tax. What I can do, Madam Vice Speaker, and I know, of course, to the Public Auditor and Mr. Chair, I can make sure that perhaps I have our Deputy Director provide some kind of documents or maybe an update to you, Mr. Chair, so that way you could share it with the body, so that way we'll know where we are with that.
And when the RFP will come out, right?
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you. Thank you very much. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you,
Truly
Madam
appreciate
Vice.
it.
Just a quick follow-up on your question that there are some businesses doing business on Guam and not registered? Is there an exemption for military and for, excuse me?
I mean, sorry, sir.
I just wanted to know, when you mentioned that there are some businesses doing business on Guam, may it be military, because it's very specific. They're
Sir,
not registered on Guam, and I always understood you're required to register to do business on Guam.
Yeah, I apologize if I perhaps misspoke or miscommunicated. It could be that there is an award, maybe that's an award that's given for a contractor. It could even be a sub that has, we're thinking that maybe there may be some contractors that may not necessarily be properly registering. At least that's my thought, I'm sorry. But, of course, that's why we're working to try to capture that through the use of those information. Now, I don't know what is the requirements for those federal contracts with regards to, again, those awards for Guam, especially as it relates to companies that are not located on Guam. So, again, that's again what we're working to try to capture is those companies that may be doing business and have awards on Guam but may not be necessarily filing on Guam.
Well, then I would just ask that your office communicates with Joint Region and find out how they process contracts, because everybody's required to be registered on Guam. If anything, insist on them being required before they award them. Doesn't matter if they're in Egypt or wherever. If you're going to do business on Guam and do business on Guam, just pay our taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Torres, do you have any questions, ma'am, to the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was mentioned by Mr. Hiles that the general outlook for our economy will depend on two factors. One is the resumption of tourism, and I believe GVB has an estimate of about 82,000 projected. And the second factor was on the receipt of federal funds. But the question that I have is, in considering what was recently approved at the federal level with regard to EITC reimbursements for Guam, I understand that EITC reimbursements may be similar to how the Section 30 funds are reimbursed to Guam, that it's based on an estimate for the upcoming year, and it'll most likely be paid in a lump sum amount. But is that one consideration that that you have also as a contingency fund that would, or contingency payment that would help with our revenues to Guam? Or has that not been considered at all?
Thank you, Senator Torres. Our understanding of what may be passed with regards to EITC, we believe that it's going to be handled similar to ACTC, where the filer provides their filing to Rev and Tax, claim the exemption, and then quarterly, there's reimbursements that are provided, substantiated by material sent in by Rev and Tax. So Section 30, we get an advance, and then like what happened this year, there was a prior overpayment, which they took away from us. I think if we do this consistent with ACTC, We probably won't realize anything until next year because it would be based upon filings in 21 and then whatever reimbursement we get. But it would be significant and much appreciated.
So there's no chance of it being applicable to the calendar year 2022, you should not, we cannot expect or should not expect any funds received in 2022 for the calendar year?
I don't believe so, ma'am.
Okay.
Because it's based upon filing and it'll be what people file in tax year 21.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then I just wanted a clarification on the when we're triggered to go into a realignment plan. Is the 3% the average of the quarter, or how does that work out? What triggers that exactly in terms of if you should have 1 month above 3% and then 1 month falling below, or how does that work out?
Thank you again, Senator Torres. I call your attention to the CRER page 3. What we do is we provide as a part of the mandate a report that shows the monthly collections for the adopted levels. So this is something that is sent to the legislature. And what we do is we take these collection amounts and then project based upon these numbers, which are sent to the legislature. I think we did this in October. Yes, in October. But the trigger is that we have to be projecting 3% or more at the end of a quarter. So if we had, this report was indicative of that situation when we did the CRER for December, then it would have triggered the need for a fiscal realignment plan. The next trigger date would be April, when we provide the body with a report on the collections for the first quarter of this calendar year.
Okay, thank you.
And may I add something, please, Senator? With regards to, excuse me, sorry, there you go. With regards to the discussion on EATC, as Director Carlson mentioned, with regards to the other credits that we receive, the child tax credit, and also the ACTC, which is the additional child tax credit, and then also the AOTC. What happens is after every quarter or right at the end of every quarter, after making payments on those credits, then we go ahead and we request for reimbursement of the actual amounts that we've dispersed to pay our people. And we get those generally within a few weeks. And that's how that works. If this particular law is going to be in effect for 2021 taxes, or 2021 tax returns, which will be filed in 2022, then it is possible for us to receive monies in the calendar year in the next year, if that's how it is going to be applied in the law.
Because maybe it's wishful thinking, but that was my impression, and that's why I asked, why you wouldn't have a factor. I mean, not that you're banking on it, but just it on the horizon. So thanks for that information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Tony Atta, do you have any questions for the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps probably one or two. To Lester, BBMR. Of all the CARES Act fundings that we received so far, and stimulus fundings, has the entire amount already been either expended or encumbered, or do you foresee any funds being returned back to the federal government?
Sir, if we're referring to the $1.7 billion one, I don't believe that we're going to have any issues with the expenditure of the funds. There's been, like with the CARES Act, an extension of the use of the money. I think maybe in the case of the Department of Labor, or in Daphne's case, she's got a time frame to distribute the EIP. I'm sure she's very cognizant of what it is, and she's going through to make sure that that deadline of March 19th is met, and that anybody that applied, you know, she'll make sure that their paperwork is done so that they can meet the deadline. That's probably one of the deadlines that I think is kind of a hard deadline, but a lot of these other things here, we provided a grant period in the spreadsheet for you to kind of have an idea of the availability of the funds and for the time frame. So I don't, Mr. Byrne, any potential?
I agree with Mr. Carlson. The probability of our returning any funds is very, very low. And every month we review the expenditure to make sure that isn't the case and that we maximize the use of those funds.
Well, that's great to know that all the funds that we've received over the past year and a half, that they will be utilized to the, you know, every single penny. That's good to know. Any of the CARES Act fundings or any other fundings that we received so far, did they have any attachment to it to where this grant period will be for, we can perhaps hire 20 people for this period, but after that grant has expired, that we have to pick them up later on, that we have to continue it, or?
I don't believe so, sir, because when the GG ones come across my desk, it says subject to the availability of federal funds. So once the fund source is exhausted, then unfortunately then the employment is also terminated.
I see. So that way we're not blindsided by any unexpected employment that.
Yes, we won't be burdened with employees without the prerequisite funds to support them. Yes, sir, you're correct.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Duenas, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple. I first wanted to congratulate yourself and OFB for the revenue for the current fiscal year. As had we adopted the other revenue, we'd be a lot closer in terms of that issue continuing on the need for the realignment plan. We still may be, but we'll discuss that as we go along. My first question is to Mr. Hiles. So when I go over to BBMR in a little while, your discussion on the issue of the expenditure of PUA and the other federal programs you're administering, FPUC, do those end here in March?
The current PUA program ends in March. However, the House has passed an extension, and that's being discussed in the Senate. And I would expect that there'd be something continued.
You're talking about extension of the current funding, not the proposed new rescue package.
I believe the current funding expires in March.
Okay.
And I'd have to confirm that. But I believe that there will be a continuation in some form.
Okay. So
I know the funding we're using now was basically an extension of the funding we received last year. So it could be, that could happen again. I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen till the law is passed.
So this is part of your optimism or your forecast?
I'm basically looking at, yeah, the total revenue.
Okay. So Lester, I guess you have those, that you represented the preliminary for February. And so you had Could you repeat your numbers in terms of what the preliminary is and how it's going up? Because if I heard it right, it was under the BPT and withholding.
Yes, sir. Clarification, my staff just sent me something saying that the PUA FPUC accounts expired June 30th, 2022.
Okay.
Okay.
So in terms of that, that's to continue going through this current fiscal year with whatever balances they have for sending out for the program.
The money is good and available till June of 2022.
Okay, good. So your February snapshot is an increase of what amounts again in BPT as well as withholding?
Yeah, what we were looking at, and Mr. Byrne can chime in as well because he also follows these collections.
Okay.
We had $17 million allocated for collection for withholding taxes. And again, I refer you to the sheet that I was holding up earlier that we're
Yeah, I have that in
required,
front of me, yeah.
so you can check that. What we did receive was $21.4 million in withholding taxes. Individual income taxes, we also got $1.2 million more in this month. BPT, we're a little shy of what it was that we projected. We were looking at 25. We got 24.4. But that trend is something that, the gap is narrowing. So all in all, our taxes for the month of February were $4 million more than what we anticipated collecting.
Okay. So Daphne, just real quick, is in this event, did revenue tax experience any anomaly, or was this basically just across the board in terms of the BPT for February increase that BBMR is representing? Is there any major collection that was made, any past due, or was it just basically your same efforts overall for BBT?
With regards to all of collection of all taxes, our collection efforts have continued, meaning that our collections team continues to work with those people who may have past due taxes. And so that's something that we do on an ongoing basis. Where, of course, and Madam Vice Speaker did mention, I guess, the issue of federal contractors. Periodically we do programs like that where we do have very focused collection efforts. Those are things that are going to be happening. Our focus in this past year, of course, has been, again, just to try to make sure that we roll out a lot of the programs that we have. We have very tight deadlines for a lot of those. And then now to pivot to try to get more refunds and other things to our people. But with regards to collections efforts, our collections efforts have been pretty, I think, steady so far, especially right now during this public health emergency. It is a little bit difficult. We have been seeing people who have been coming in to try to work on installment payments and other things like that. But our collection efforts are pretty consistent and have been pretty consistent through this period.
Okay.
Senator Duenas?
Yes.
We also try to make it a point to include what we call non-recurring revenue.
Right.
So like if you look at the September 30th CRER, there is a note about corporate taxes that were received in what we call a non-recurring basis, as well as, of course, the withholding taxes. So if there's something that is outside of the norm, we do footnote it, and we do include it in the report.
Okay.
Senator, I didn't see any anomalous collections in February.
Okay, that's good news. So that's a steady roll. So I guess then, as a follow-up then, Lester, and maybe this is a general conversation about how much is left to go out. You're saying all the way up to September, as your staff has indicated to you. I mean, it would stand to reason, because I don't see a whole bunch of people putting back in the employment line. So it really is the withholding from the PUA and the FPUC that's going out that's stabilizing and maybe even increasing on withholding.
I don't think so, sir. I think that the opening of businesses, from 25% in restaurants to 50 to 75%, opened the door for more employment opportunities. I also think that, the reopening of bars has also provided a good number of employment to people who just were not able to continue in that industry. So as the restrictions and our infection rate is under control, and some of these restrictions are lifted, I think you're seeing the result of more people going back to work and more money in the economy. I also would like to note that in the discussions leading up to the executive budget request submission, there are a number of bankers and people that follow the economy that are talking about how our residents are starting to put money in the bank, and they're saving money. So one of the good things about this pandemic and the uncertainty is that it has taken hold of people to be a little bit more conscientious about the money that they do have. So deposit accounts have increased, which is a good thing.
Yeah, well, that's going to be interesting that the bars that for a couple of weeks and the businesses that have been opening, I hope that's the case, Lester, that withholding is already showing up in that positive amount, within that relatively short period of time. So that may be good news, and so we'll see going forward.
I don't believe that a lot of the restrictions that were lifted are going to were evidenced in what it was that we reported, because they only opened up on February 24th.
Right.
So they didn't even report any BPT.
So I know that, but I'm saying on the withholding, so you're saying that the withholding already went up by that amount in that short period of time in terms of when restaurants went to 50% and bars open for the last couple of weeks. It was the withholding that I was talking about, because we know that a lot of money has been coming in on the withholding from the FPUC and that's just unavoidable. I mean, that's what has been saving us in terms of, it's very clear. So if the withholding has gone up, as you've represented, and taken us slightly below that 3% threshold for having to continue to think about realignment, and if that's reflective of only a couple of pay periods, that's pretty significant.
Sir, I'm very hopeful that we'll slowly come back to some semblance of normalcy.
We're all hoping and praying, sir, and that's why I'm just trying to get an analysis of where that fantastic February is coming from, and I hope, I pray that it's true and even better. I mean, we're all rooting for the same thing here, I hope. So in closing, I just wanted to say it because I mentioned that, because even if you look at the budget request for fiscal year 2022, in all categories under the general fund, even in just that, I guess what we're going to be going through when we discuss the budget is basically a realignment on the budget request, because it is in excess of 3% in terms of your overall budget request versus the 2021 adopted. So I just think it's important for us to be cognizant of that on all levels, and to have all hands on deck, as you say, for opening the economy safely, for tourism and everything else. Perhaps we have this SES in another quarter to see where we're at, but absolutely, I'm trying to be as optimistic as you are. But even reflected in the budget request versus the adopted 2021, that once again is over 3% downward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, and
right,
Senator Duenas, I would also draw another analogy to your view of the general fund as submitted in the EBR. It is $19.9 million less, or 3.16% less than the current year. Just because we think that, conservatively speaking, it's a good starting point for our conversation with you guys.
Absolutely.
So it's not a fiscal realignment plan. It's where we think general fund revenues are going to be at a level that you guys, we hope we can get you guys to agree to, or at least discuss.
Certainly,
Okay.
Lester, and that's why I pointed out that it was so amazing that this body adopted last year the conservative amount. And we're glad that you came down with this conservative amount, because that is right on target with realignment. So that's what we'll be doing this fiscal year, at least discussing how we're going to prioritize funding our agencies. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Senator Reyes. Senator Talina Nelson, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all the hard work that you have been doing during this time of COVID and as we recover our economy. I have a question for GVB. In the analysis that you provided in the presentation, you put an amount of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is in the chart, calendar year 1990 to 2020, and it was a decrease in $1.1 billion. Is there any accounting for what is currently being seen, or are you just doing an overall decrease of $1.1 billion?
This is, sorry, thank you, Senator. This is in regards to the first slide, correct?
Correct.
So the 1.1 billion, that's visitor arrivals for the global industry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not.
So it's not dollar amount?
Not local.
Okay, I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying.
No problem.
Okay. And then in the last slide, when we talked about the Guam historical arrivals, the destinations, and Guam is placed at 19.7%. Are these all coming from the same market sources?
No, so they do have different market profiles.
Okay.
Yeah, but what we were trying to compare was island destinations that offer a similar kind of product, and we just wanted to show that based on certain protocols and easing of those, what was the direct result of that?
Okay, because Guam's main market is in areas of Asia, and so I'm just wondering, because areas of Asia closed down their borders and stopped travel for a long period of time, I'm wondering if that could also have an impact in relative if these other source markets also, or these other countries or destinations also offer the same source markets, which is Asia. So do you have that kind of comparison?
Well, I mean, for the most part, yeah, it is a little tricky. It's never really apples to apples. But what we were trying to look at was, again, the product offering of the destination, beaches, tropical getaways, and things of that nature.
Okay.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. But even at that, the source markets between Japan, Korea, Taiwan, they all behave very differently.
Right.
I mean, even in 2018 with the North Korea threats, our Korean arrivals spiked and Japan went down. So
Right.
we expect something similar to happen in terms of recovery. We do anticipate possibly Korea and Taiwan coming back first, and then Japan to follow suit after. So.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify if we were doing a proper analysis, if we were comparing each destination to the markets that they come from. But Guam is very unique from the other source markets. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And then, Mr. Gary, for the military contracting, you stated that you mentioned that there's $539 million coming in from the military buildup. And can you just clarify those numbers once more? Can you please turn on your mic? Thank you, sir.
This is from the Interagency Coordination Group of Inspectors General in their annual report that was just released January 29. For the fiscal year 2020, DoD obligated $529.3 million and expended $365.1 million. So first there's an appropriations. That means the Congress has made the funds available for these projects, but the obligation means they that's usually obligated by a contract. It's an award, so that work is likely to come. But until the sum of the work is done, it doesn't get reported as an expenditure in a tax revenue. So there's several steps in the process before it turns into revenue.
Okay, thank you. But assuming that the 365.1 million that has already been spent, would we see anything, does that mean that at that process we are already seeing that kind of revenue? We should anticipate that kind of revenue reflecting those kind of contracts?
Well, the expenditure was for not just one particular year. It was for aggregate for the build-up project.
What year did it start, Mr. Gary?
I believe in about 2010.
2010, okay. Thank you, sir. Director Shimizu, how much has Guam been able to capture from the DoD contracts of the 365.1 million aggregate that was collected?
Ma'am, I'm sorry, I don't have those figures, but with regards to, of course, the collections of those, as I mentioned, we are undertaking that collections project, and so that's something, again, what we have done, and even while I've been here, in 2019, we did start the project, but we were not able to complete that project, so basically what we did is utilizing the usaspend.gov information, we made sure that we had actually, of course, made sure that we identified all of those contractors that had Guam contracts or had Guam, and then made sure that we sent out notices to them advising of collections, and then we were able to, again, work on trying to collect on those. We began that collection effort back in the end of 2019. Again, when 2020 happened, of course, we were not able to kind of resume that, but now we're working on that again, and I don't have that figure, though, ma'am.
Okay, is Guam able to capture, I know you talked a little bit about it with the Vice Speaker, about some of the challenges that DRT is having, but does Guam in current statute have the capability to capture all of the, I don't know, what would you do, withholding tax and income tax from these DoD contracts, whether they operate on, whether they are based on Guam or not? Is DRT able to capture all of that?
Well, we believe that, for example, for any employees that are Guam-based employees, that withholding should be coming to Guam for those employees. That's one, on the withholding side. The gross receipts taxes as well. If the gross receipts taxes are generated based on services that are provided here on Guam, then yes, those should be subject to GRT. Where it gets a little bit kind of grayish is is in terms of their actual corporate income taxes. And so, some of them may file in 1120F, which is for foreign companies, but the withholding and the GRT we believe to be pretty straightforward, ma'am.
Okay.
Selena, Senator Nelson, may I correct? The 365 million was actual expenditures in FY20, not accumulative.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Gary. Okay, so what does Guam need to do to ensure that we capture, for every contractor that is awarded a contract with DoD or Guam, what do we need to do to ensure that we capture that revenue in its entirety?
Some things that we talked about, again, as I mentioned, utilizing usaspend.gov, there are limitations because the data is based on award and not necessarily on payment period. And that's something that has been kind of a challenge, right? So although, for example, there may have been 20 million that was awarded to a certain contractor in 2021, the contract may not have started yet, and it's reflected as, as awarded fully as 20 million, but really those payments may not happen or begin to happen until 2023, 2024. Okay. So that's some of the limitations is that.
We should anticipate that then and fix all of the kinks in the system so that we can.
Right, that the timing piece, right, so that there may be a timing difference. So the award date and the award amount necessarily doesn't translate into that those are the periods that are, that the amounts are being paid to those, or that they're even the execution of the contract, that's not necessarily the period. And those are a little bit some of the challenges, but again, those are things that, as we work on these projects, we work to try to overcome either through perhaps discussions with Joint Region and NAFAC. And so then that way we can make sure that we close the gap on those.
Okay, thank you. And then in just last year in December, the legislature passed Bill 368, and that was to give DRT the authority to work with the tobacco's tax stamp rules and regulations. How far have you come in the RFP or anything like that?
My understanding is that our deputy director has been working with the Office of the Attorney General.
Oh, okay. So it's not, it hasn't been, the RFP hasn't been completed just yet?
It has not been issued as far as I know, ma'am.
Okay. And then Gita, thank you, Director Shimizu. I'm trying to move fast, Mr. Chair. Just, I think one more question for Gita. Gita, the sheet that you handed us, the loan inquiries, 150 totaling to 8,429,000. What is the, why were only 17 applications submitted? Do you know?
A lot of the businesses made inquiries, expressed how much they needed, but then they were afraid of picking up debt during a time that they don't know when businesses will come back. And we launched this program last year in March, and so the ones that have come forward have, just asked for help to survive, but most have held back.
And then the low interest rate, or the interest rate, is the interest rate the same for all businesses that apply?
Yes.
And what is that interest rate?
So for the first program, the 90-day deferment, we did 1% above Treasury, and so a lot of the loans were issued at 1.5%. Normally, our rates are 4 points above Treasury. So for this period, we did lower it to average about 1.5%. As you know, Treasuries were very low this past year.
And the businesses were still hesitant to apply at 1.5%?
Yes, a lot of them were just nervous about picking up the debt, even with the 90-day deferment.
That's so peculiar.
Yeah. So that's why we were talking to them, and the GITA administrator is looking at possibly launching a 1-year interest-only payment program, just to, again, even though we are having this some sign of comeback, they understand it's going to take time to get back on their feet.
And how does GITA determine what business constitutes as a small business or is eligible for a small business loan? Is it by revenues they receive? Is it by their net profits? What is it?
Almost all businesses on Guam do qualify as a small business. We normally refer to our federal counterparts. Again, this being federal fund source, we use their definitions as much as possible. And so it's either by category of business or number of employees they hold.
Can you give me an example? Would Payless be considered a small business?
Payless could be considered a small business. Again, it depends on their category of retail, for instance. And under SBA, they have a retail category and number of employees or revenue amounts. So we look at SBA's format as our resource.
Okay, so I guess for me, the general public, I think, would define small business as perhaps a business that is making less than $1 million a year in gross, and so that's not necessarily the fact. It could be a company that makes more than $1 million a year.
Right, just because, again, we have to refer back to the original source of funds, which was from the federal government.
Right, and so we follow their definition of small business and their
Yes.
calculation?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to ask questions.
Thank you. Senator Tello, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity, and thank you, everyone. I'll try and be very short. For Gary Hiles, regarding Department of Labor, the Defense Authorization Act that was passed indicated there was some restrictions lifted for the H-2 workers. What difference has it made since the passage of that Defense Authorization Act that is for the H-2 workers coming to Guam?
It's allowed H-2 workers from the Philippines and H-2 workers to work on non-construction non-defense contracts without regard to other limitations.
So have you seen any significant changes, since that? Because there were some restrictions, and now with the passage of the DAA, have you seen anything really? Any changes, like additional?
Well, the process for getting H-2 workers is quite lengthy, usually months.
I'm sorry, say again.
The
I'm sorry.
process from the application to the actually getting H-2 workers on Guam is quite lengthy, months. So I wouldn't expect to see increase immediately, but over the last couple of years, the number of H-2s has gone up and construction has gone up in employment. And I would expect that provision to allow that to expand significantly later this year and next year.
Gary, do you have any numbers for us?
I don't with me, but
Okay,
I
I would
do
appreciate
have H-2 numbers monthly.
Okay. I greatly appreciate if we can get those numbers, if you can give it to our oversight chair, and if we can get that to Mr. Chair, those numbers, the increase in those numbers for H2, because I think it's going to make a difference, with our economy, bringing these workers in. The other one was BSP. You spoke when we talked about use tax. In fact, we had a walkthrough recently, I believe last week, and we invited BSP as well as DRT. DRT actually responded, but nobody showed up from either BSP or Revenue Tax. There were quite a bit of questions that were talking about use tax. However, I do appreciate BSP, the information you provided with, automated, and the oversight chair of Revenue Tax knows we've been working along with a couple of other senators to try to capture the use tax. However, the information that you're providing us on use tax, can you please provide it to us that you're Mr. Santos, correct? Mr. Santos, yes. I think you were reading something and giving us some ideas on the automated. Yes.
I'll give you the source documentation. So, like, say for the.
Can you talk into the mic,
Sorry.
please?
I'll give you the source information. So that
Thank you.
includes. So the revenues are from the CRER, and also the tonnage for imports or for air cargoes from the airports report, and then I have the port statistics. But I'll give you the summary that I provided.
I really appreciate it. Yeah, your white paper on that, because you didn't show up. There was a lot of questions that we had that would have answered it. Revenue tax, we do know that you cannot demand the payment of taxes. You have to, by federal law, provide the product to the individual when picking it up, and cannot hold it. Customs cannot hold it. They're obligated to provide the customer, and then later on, Revenue Tax then has to follow through with obtaining those taxes on the use tax. And that's where we're falling short. And that's, I think, when the automated system comes in, it's going to be very helpful for both to connect on that. But I greatly appreciate any kind of information, and Daphne will talk afterwards with regards, because I guess Lawrence never showed up on that. So quite a good information. But I appreciate what you brought in. OPA, you mentioned that by the end of the month, that you're hoping the financial audit will be completed. I just wanted to verify and confirm by the end of March.
it'll probably, all of the audits will be out by the end of the month, except for maybe the Guam audit, because that needs all the component units. And so I figure maybe at the very latest, the middle of April, we'll have the Guam audit out. But
Yep.
I'm
Okay.
forcing all the component units by the end of the month so that he can finish his Guam-wide audit
So-
within a couple weeks after that.
So, Mr. Byrne, what is your estimated time to complete the audit for GovGuam? Oh, you have to turn it on, sorry.
As the public auditor just said, we have to have all the component units reported in. So I agree with his assessment of mid-April for the combined audit.
Okay, so mid-April, by end of March, should be done with OPA, then mid-April we'll have it. That's good. I mean, this is really important to have. We've been getting those like right in August, and it makes it very difficult when we go into budget. So I really appreciate all the hard work and pushing toward that very stringent agenda and providing it for us. Greatly appreciate it. I do have a question for BB with regards to the Section 30 revenues on the CRER report. I've noticed that ending August 2020 and September 2020 each indicates $1.6 million shortfall and in the Section 30 revenues. And then the CR report for the first month of FY21 indicates a shortfall of $3.4 million. And then every month after that, on the CR report, it indicates the same amount, about $3.4+ million. What is that attributed to? I'm trying to follow along on the CRE report and trying to figure out why is there always a negative that's constant, almost the same amount every month. Can you explain for that, Lester, please?
The amount that was approved by the legislature was $68 million. Then right after that was done, we received the award from Treasury, and it was 65. So you're going to see a $3 million shortfall. It's not a cumulative one. It's a static one. So the budget had 68 million. The actual one-time receipt was 65. There's your $3 million.
I see. So that explains it. So that's going to stay throughout the whole entire CRE report every month that we receive then until we get closer, because I'm noticing, yeah, that's what you said, it's cumulative, right?
Yeah. No, it's not cumulative. So we already got the money. We already got the $65 million. So that number that you're going to see, basically it's going to stay the same.
Okay, so that means there is a shortfall of
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so it's a shortfall. Okay. The other question I had is on the CR report again with regards to the footnotes on number 3, the additional trial tax credit. It says report does not include ACTC reimbursement to date, right? Which are not factored in the FY21 adopted level. And then you have these numbers beside. Can you explain this one again to me? I know you brought it up.
Maybe I should have the auditor explain that, because it was at his behest when he was speaker and the appropriations chair that he made it a point that for reporting purposes that we're double counting revenue. So we took his lead when he was here, and we have continued to provide the information in a manner consistent with former Speaker Cruz's desires. We agree with him.
And this doesn't reflect at all? I mean, because you said adopted levels does not factor in 2021, then you have these, so it does not include. I'm trying to, I'll move on for the sake of time, and I'll figure this out. I'll give your office a call and kind of explain a little bit more.
Sure.
But other than that, the $4 million, of course, on the withholding, it's good news. However, I think my good Senator Duenas talked about that. So, and I had my ET. Yeah, that's what I have so far. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Senator Joanne Brown, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure whether I should feel comfortable or very uncomfortable with the information that's been provided. I'm kind of along the line of Senator Chris. certainly we've done a number of budgets, but I mean, if I can ask Mr. Carlson, if we remove the federal assistance we've gotten, where would we be right now with regards to our budget?
We would be really, 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 really hurting. If we didn't get the FPUC and the PUA, if we didn't get the $118 million, because remember, there was a significant amount of money that was provided for the Ajuda Ibn Ghafa. There was money that was provided for the other program that Daphne did, the other one the program of Salafi. So you're right, Senator. If there wasn't any federal funding and this pandemic hit us without federal support, we would have done a fiscal realignment plan. We would have done a lot of things, and we really would be a government in peril.
So I think it's safe to say I don't think we're being rescued by, an additional percentage in restaurants perhaps and bars being open the last couple of weeks unless we're all out there drinking and happy, I guess. It would be fair to say that, wouldn't it?
I was only making a point.
No, I understand,
Yes.
but I just think in terms of the issues certainly that we're looking with, I think it's an important point to clarify. I mean, I would like to think that certainly as our base widens and more of our businesses are getting back to some sense of normalcy and our people are out there consuming and spending money, that would be wonderful. But I think in all fairness, if we didn't, as you mentioned, and I think we concur, if we didn't receive the financial money that we have received in the different programs that have been provided, we would be in a very, very bad situation.
We would.
I mean, we're anticipating, of course, if Congress does come up with a $660+ million additional money, then that would be great for this year. I think we'll be able to bridge, hopefully. But I guess what we also need to anticipate is perhaps what do we do next year if it doesn't? Congress may not always be as generous. And the benefits the states have is they don't have the borders we have here and the limitations we have out in the Pacific and what our concerns are as an island versus what activity can happen there. Hoping that we're on a road to recovery and that this pandemic will have subsided and, we're on a positive track. I think that's what we're all looking for and hoping for. But if that were to be the case, if I can ask the Guam Visitors Bureau, I keep hearing anticipation, assuming that we're on that road to recovery. What's your estimated time frame to get to some sense of normalcy with regards to our tourists coming to Guam? Again, understanding factors of safety and travel and all those things that anyone, including us, I haven't gotten on a plane in a while for that very reason. What are you estimating at the Guam Visitors Bureau for some level of recovery on an industry that pretty much has been at a standstill for the past year?
Thank you, Senator. In terms of some sense of normalcy, or at least gaining momentum again in terms of growth, we are looking at about 2 to 3 year recovery, so sometime around 2023, 2024. But again, one of the things that we are trying to understand is how much of that has been permanently lost.
Yes.
It took 50 years to get to 1.6 million visitors, so starting from the ground and going back up. What that number looks like, I couldn't tell you. Maybe half that number in 2023, 700,000, 800,000. Obviously, at this point, we don't know. So this is kind of corroborated with a lot of larger tourism entities. IATA, WTTC, the UNWTO have all had similar projections of 2023, 2024 in terms of almost 2019 levels of visitor arrivals. So.
Well, I think that's something we need to be mindful of going into this budget. I mean, of course, we want to sustain as much as we can and fund as much as we can. But, at some point, I am a bit concerned that there's going to be a significant drop, just like we're looking at your figures here, where, it's an immediate drop as a result of the pandemic. And I think that's something we need to be mindful. I love the rosy picture. I think we all want to look at it and embrace it, but I think we can anticipate if we're not going to ensure, we've got no way of guaranteeing that our tourism industry is going to by next fiscal year or the year after, even 3 years from now, depending on the dynamics of what happened. And at some point, the chickens are going to come home to roost, and that's what concerns me. And I think I agree with Senator Duenas in looking at that perspective a little more on the conservative side, because we can sustain at a certain level. If we're still adding on, we're still hiring, we're still increasing costs. We already know that every year insurance is probably going to go up. What we have to pay to retirement is going to go up. Those are natural figures, assuming we never add another body, into the government of Guam in terms of hiring. So I just think that perspective needs to be put in line with the reality of where we're at. Great if Congress comes through with another 660 plus million to help us get through this year, but I'm worried about next year and the year after. Because I don't think we can totally ignore, obviously, the tremendous contribution that tourism has made to the island and what impact it's had on the industry and the workers that are there and the investors. I have no idea. Hopefully for those companies that own these hotels, maybe they're not paying any if they're not paying any mortgages on it, hopefully they're doing well. I mean, I don't know what the status is of the hotels down there, if they're able to sustain the ownership of those, their ownership of these hotels now. So I just think we need to put that into the discussion and the dialogue, because these things are not that far away, next fiscal year or the year after. I've been in here in budgets when we've done 6 different budgets in a single budget year to get through a year. So I just think that's something we need to keep in mind with regards to this, because we don't know, we don't have the crystal ball to look in what's going to happen with our visitor industry. And like I said, that's with the hopeful desire that this pandemic is on a positive road. That is our hope. So I certainly appreciate your input with regards to that. I do want to ask for Gita, and certainly to follow up on the questions that Senator Nelson had brought up. What is the time frame within which these applicants, these businesses have come to Gita to look in and apply for the loans that you have here?
What we reported are the loans we received, our loan applications received from April through December. As soon as we get them, we try and process them through, but we hope to continue to do our outreach to the small businesses, try and be more creative to help them through this.
Yeah, I mean, no, I understand. I mean, I can see if someone's already in debt, not wanting to accumulate more debt, but do you have a gauge out there with the businesses of those that have been able to hang on, or versus what has already closed, and probably some of these businesses that perhaps might not reopen again? Do you have a pulse on that?
Well, they've been through it for the past year, so a lot of them have adapted, the ones that we've spoken to. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of them are adapting. They are planning to be creative, but, again, they are also hoping for the tourism to come back and
Sure.
the economy. But a lot of them have felt the impact and again, treading carefully.
And in terms of the remaining funds, is there any time limit that these funds will be available, or do you have them
No.
indefinitely available for
Yeah,
for
we
potential
have them
businesses?
indefinitely.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope it'd be good to hear what options can be made to expand and maybe, encourage some of our businesses who have the confidence, who are willing to hang on. And because otherwise, I mean, when you actually think about it, what other businesses have not been put back in operation, aside from the tourism, because the visitors are not here, but now that there's a little more latitude being open to restaurants, and the bars now have a certain amount of patronage that are able to operate. Is there any other existing business that we know about that's not able to operate because of the pandemic, or restrictions because of the pandemic?
Well, we're entertaining specialty businesses. We're entertaining manufacturers, self-made businesses, and things like things that were reliant on big events held, be it florists or even beauticians.
Okay.
I mean, again, they've lost a lot of businesses. They're
Right.
able to maintain because of the various SBA programs, the PPP and the EIDL. But now they're even if those are being forgiven, they're still trying to be very cautious about how to move forward. And again, they're relying on us doing our best to help them. And we have very flexible terms. Even the ones that came in for the 90-day deferment, they're saying, we need more time, and so we give it to them. But yeah, we haven't done any foreclosures, but we will continue to work with them.
No, I appreciate the insight with regards to that. Other than that, Mr. Chairman, I don't have any other questions, and thank you for the opportunity to ask and comment. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Sabina Paris, do you have any questions, ma'am?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here today. Just a couple of quick questions, starting with Director Chimazu. So I guess in anticipation of the EIP3, there's been talk that it's going to be based on the 2020 income taxes. What is the latest on that?
As I understand, I believe I think it may be actually 2019 and 2020 as substitute. That's based on a discussion that I had just a couple of days ago. But if it's not, then it may be the other way, 2020 with the 2019 substitute. So there may be 2 years that are allowed.
Okay, so 2019 is the first one, and then 2020, or is it the reverse?
Hold on just a second. Currently, it's saying based on 2019.
Okay. Yeah, because I just also want to highlight the progress that DRT has made in regards to being able to file online the 1040 forms. And I hear it's very easy, and that's if that is done online, it would facilitate the process of getting the EIP3 payments out.
Thank you, ma'am. And with regards to EIP, though, if it's EIP3, if it's based on 2019, again, 2019 returns cannot be filed online right now because we closed out the portal for that and we were allowing 2020 returns to be filed online. But with regards to the processing of 2019 returns, we're continuing to process 2019 returns for the purpose of trying to finish paying out EIP2 as much as possible to everybody. So as I mentioned, even those people who filed their 2019 returns at the end of January and even coming to early Feb, if they qualify and there's nothing, they're A status, then we've been processing EIP2 for those people. So if EIP3 comes around and it's based on 2019, we have a pretty good amount of 2019 returns that are already processed in our system.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to use taxes. So what are the issues that you're facing in collecting use tax on goods arriving at the airport?
With regards to use tax, and again, thank you for bringing this up, Senator. And with regards to use tax, when we have met with Customs, and it's been a while since we've met with Customs, but the collections of use tax at the airport is different from the collections of use tax at the seaport. At the seaport, my understanding is that at the seaport you can hold a cargo or shipment if the taxes are not paid. My understanding is that for the purpose of, use tax as it applies to air cargo, it does not allow for the air cargo to not be held. I believe there was a federal case that sets precedent for that, and I will have to get that information. I did get information from CQA regarding that a while ago. I believe it's a FedEx case. So that's a bit of the difference with regards to the use tax for again, air cargo versus sea cargo, and that's something that is difficult. It makes it difficult, of course, again, because with regards to trying to collect use tax at the airport, again, as I mentioned, there's a few things that are very difficult. One, it's a purely manual system, meaning that everything is done by paper. There is no system for tracking exemptions, and the exemptions are the $1,000 a month exemption, not to exceed $5,000 per year, right? But that's for that's for an individual who brings in any type of product that's subject to use tax, whether it comes through the post office or the airport or the seaport. So that's very difficult to track. And then the other thing, again, is that even if Customs did want to try to collect at the point that those items do come in, it's not, by law, I don't think they can, because there is an issue of the fact that those taxes are due on the 20th of the month and not at the point that those monies are received. In addition to that, and we've talked to Customs about this as well, when the UST forms are filled out, they're not always completely filled out. Social Security numbers are not there. The names, may not even be legible. And so those things cause it to be very difficult for us to collect. Although we may have taxpayer data, there may be, multiple people that have the same name. And so, it makes it very difficult. So those are the kind of the issues that we have discussed with Customs. And we talked to them about, perhaps making their, I think there might be like a $50 penalty if you don't fill out the use tax form properly, but perhaps if there is a penalty, maybe making it a little bit more stiff so that way, and also changing so that the data is complete on the form, but also changing it again so that there isn't that lag between the time that you receive the shipment and the time that you pay the tax, because that particular period, that gap, that actually cut, from, like, say, if I receive something March 5, but then I'm not required to pay it until, April 20, that time period actually it becomes difficult for us, because those forms, they come to us, we actually enter them manually into our system so that we can generate a notice and send it out. So there's a lag, and the lag is more than the 20 days, or to the 20th of the next month. So those are a lot of the challenges that we face with regards to use tax in particular as it relates to air cargo.
Thank you. And one more question for Daphne. So how does DRT monitor DoD subcontractors, and where can you get that information?
And again, with regards to all contractors that have federal contracts, we do utilize usaspend.gov. And then also what we do as well is we do cross-reference those against, of course, whatever database we have for, the companies that are filing or have historically filed with us. But really, we utilize the usaspend.gov primarily as the basis for determining the awards, at least for those non-filers or companies who may not be filing with us.
So that also lists the subcontractors too?
I believe it's sub and prime, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Daphne.
But the prime pays the GRT on the contract.
Mr. Santos, that's why we have the mic. Please use the mic. Thank you.
So the prime actually is the one that pays the full amount. They don't pass the GRT down to the subcontractor. I think that was a change a few years back. So, go ahead.
Right. So yes, but sub and prime, and so at least for the purpose of collecting withholding and GRT, although as the deputy of BSP did mention that whether or not you're a sub or prime contractor does dictate who does pay the gross receipts tax. But again, for our purposes, we do send out notices so that way we can, give notice to those companies that are not filing with us.
Okay. I thought from a previous conversation, Daphne, though, you'd mentioned that GRT is owed by subcontractors. So how can you?
So there was a change in the law, and I think at one point it was the sub that was the one that had to pay the GRT and not the prime, and then I think it changed and it became the prime and not the sub. And so there is an exemption. So if you are a sub, you do not pay, right?
You still file.
Right, you still have to file and then you report, but then there's an exemption code for you. But that's the law, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So this question is for Gita. So in the temporary economic assistant mitigation plan, so it seems like it's based more on an EIDL type of program where there is an interest attached to it, but has there been any thought given to making it more like a PPP program where it could be a loan turned into a grant based on what it's used for?
For this program, no. Again, the original intent was to create economic activity, but it was given to us as a loan fund program, not as a grant.
And is there perhaps opportunity for businesses that may want to pivot to a different industry? So say a business is a service industry and they want to change to healthcare. Is there a potential for that to use this type of funding, or maybe in the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's no limit on the type of business that can submit an application for this, but it has to be a business on Guam and creating employment or economic activity.
Thank you. This question is for Lester. In regards to the war claim, so I know there is money that's taken off the top of Section 30. Is that pretty much fixed, or can it be adjusted based on how much has been given out?
Thank you, Senator. I think they're taking $12 million a year. I don't know the status of the payments. I think Matt Santos alluded to the fact that we may be, or Gary, I think, alluded to the fact that we may be more than halfway done, but I don't have an answer readily available. I can check.
So yeah, perhaps looking at the protocol, maybe that might be something to consider, but I appreciate that. Okay, question for GVB. So there's a study that is, I think, in progress. It's called the Tourism Repositioning Strategy. Are you familiar with that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Senator?
So it's a study that was funded through BSP. So I don't know if Matt has any knowledge of that one. The Tourism Repositioning Strategy.
Oh yeah, I can speak on that one.
Sorry, I can't hear if you can speak into the mic.
Yeah, I think our chief planner or GVB could speak better on that one. I'm not involved in that.
I'm sorry, can you?
I'm not involved with that personally, so I'd have to defer to GVB or our chief planner at my department.
Yeah.
So Senator, we haven't seen this plan, this repositioning strategy or study that was done through BSP, but GVB working with our counterparts, especially with the airport, GITA, we are already in that process of repositioning ourselves, kind of going digital with a lot of our processes and kind of making that an incentive to attract visitors. So there has been some investment into projects that would really align us with what's going on currently and how to create a safe travel experience for those so when they're ready to return, Guam isn't too far behind from the rest of the world. So, but in terms of that particular study, we have not seen that yet.
Yeah, so maybe it's good to reach out to BSP on that one because I think from my understanding, they handed it off to GVB, but it doesn't seem like nobody knows about this on your end. Yeah, so I just, I guess where there's challenges, there's, opportunities. And so when you look at the numbers, and obviously there seems to be a limitation and of the numbers of visitors coming, so perhaps, I don't know if this repositioning strategy or study can look at, markets that can maybe offset the loss from the loss of incoming visitors by looking at, more higher budgeting visitors that come to Guam. So yeah, that's probably, one suggestion that I may have. If we want to rebuild our tourism economy, obviously, I think it's important to, in addition to everything what you guys are doing, as far as automation, looking at, Taiwan seems to be one big market that's coming up, but perhaps even looking at other types of markets out there that can bring in more dollars per visitor, right? If we have to limit the amount of visitors that are coming based on, social distancing, so I guess the logical thing is to think about, how can we bring in more money per visitor? So, that's just my suggestion.
Absolutely, Senator, and we have been very proactive in trying to understand what the impacts are with our source markets. And what we've been doing is we've shifted some of our exit surveys here on Guam and put it actually in country to understand what the consumers are thinking about, where the demand's coming from. And we've tested a pilot out in Korea. And surprisingly enough, it's the more seasoned traveler, the older generation that seems to be the first to want to move. So ready to travel within the next year, ages 50 and up. So these are some of the things that we're looking at and trying to understand. This is our initial market. So we're really diversifying within the markets that we have already into certain segments. So we are remaining proactive, Senator.
Okay. Thank you to the panel and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, you had a clarification question you wanted to pose to the panel?
Yeah, I didn't hear it clearly. If you could just repeat what you said. I think it was BBMR early in the program. Did you talk about a reimbursement for war claims is going to be made, or no? Did I mishear that?
I think we were talking about the EITC and how that might be coming in as a reimbursement.
No, when you were talking about the, very early, sorry. I don't remember that, okay.
If it was Section 30, then maybe the reason why it was down to 65 is because we were overpaid in a prior year.
Say that part again? You were overpayment in prior year?
Yeah, remember, we put in an advance request,
Yeah.
and then there's a reconciliation.
Mhm.
So the 68.6, which is what we always believed the floor was going to be for war claims. We always thought we were never going to get less than 68.6, but that didn't include a overpayment that we had to make last year.
That
So-
you had to make, or you received?
Well, they debited it from us. So instead of
Oh.
getting $68 million, we got 65.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Nelson, you had one follow-up question, and we're going to wrap this up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mrs. Garcia, just, I was wondering, you mentioned that I just want to make it, the team, the Temporary Economic Assistance Mitigation, and you said that GITA follows the similar, or mirrors the guidelines of the federal government? Is that correct?
Yes, we follow the definitions of the federal government, and whether it's defining the small business or so on, we do follow that.
Do you feel that that GITA would be able to have entertained more loan inquiries if they were to create a different type of policy? Or do they have to follow the federal guidelines?
We're able to create programs, amend the program, but we do have to stay with the original intent of how the funds were given to us. And so that's why we were able to adjust down the interest rate. The other thing that we adjusted was we were able to take, GITA, these programs are not supposed to compete with local banks. And so instead of getting 2 bank denials, we only brought it down to 1 bank denial. And it was our way of showing that we're not competing with the local banks.
And so what if, so you can't compete with the local banks, but what if GITA was offering a lower interest rate than other banks? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
GITA's loans are lenders of our loan clients, again, through the bank denial, they show that they cannot get a traditional loan.
Okay. And then what happens with the remaining funds? So there was, excuse me, close to $800,000 out of the applicants submitted that was, I guess, expended or being processed. So what happens to the remaining $7,500,000?
We just, we do make all efforts to try and lend out the funds as much as we can. And so the funds have been staying with GITA. I think early in 2001, the federal government, I believe, had done their last audit of our loan fund, and they said, we've been following the program, and the funds can stay with GITA. We wouldn't have to reimburse the federal government in this case, and so we keep it as a revolving loan fund.
Okay. I just, again, I just find it very peculiar that out of 150 loan inquiries with just a minimal of 1.5% interest, that businesses were not interested. Were they not interested, or were they not eligible? I think that's really the question. And if the eligibility requirements can be utilized to make more people have the flexibility to be eligible, I guess that's what I would ask, if that's something that GITA can do.
Absolutely. We will keep looking at it.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So it's possible?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you, Mrs. Garcia.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. And I'd like to thank the Speaker Cruz, the auditor, the Office of Public Accountability for attending, and the SES members for being here. As my committee members, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I move we adjourn today's meeting.
Do I have a second? Thank you. This committee will conclude the special economic service meeting. The time now is 4:40. Please have a nice day and be safe and enjoy the weekend. Thank you for your attendance. And for those at home, thank you for watching. Have a nice day.